You don't even have a lawyer. The man laughed out loud, turning halfway toward the gallery so everyone could hear him. Of course you don't. The woman standing alone at the opposite table did not respond. She didn't lift her eyes. She didn't flinch. She simply tightened her grip on the folded papers in her hands, as if those papers were the only thing keeping her upright. The judge looked up sharply. "Mr. Reynolds," he warned. But the man only smiled wider. "I'm sorry, Your Honor," he said, still amused. "It's just, I thought this was a serious court, not a charity." A few people in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. Someone cleared their throat. The woman's shoulders trembled slightly. But she said nothing. The judge studied her for a long moment. Then he said, quietly, "Mrs. Reynolds, are you representing yourself today?" She nodded once. "Yes, Your Honor." Her voice was steady, but it cost her everything to keep it that way. Asterisk across from her. Daniel Reynolds adjusted his tailored suit and leaned back confidently beside his attorney, a man whose briefcase alone probably cost more than the woman's entire wardrobe. Daniel glanced at his lawyer, then back at his wife. "This shouldn't take long," he said smugly. "She doesn't even understand how court works." The judge's expression hardened, but before he could respond, the courtroom doors at the back creaked open. Every head turned. A woman stepped inside. She wasn't rushed. She wasn't hesitant. She walked with the slow, deliberate certainty of someone who knew exactly where she was and why she had come. Her hair was streaked with grey, neatly pulled back. Her posture was straight. Her eyes were sharp, not angry, not emotional, just focused. The bailiff instinctively stood straighter. Daniel frowned. "Who's that?" he whispered to his lawyer. The woman stopped just behind the last row of benches, and then she spoke. "Your Honor," she said clearly, her voice carrying effortlessly through the room. "I apologize for the interruption. I believe this is the case involving my daughter." The judge looked at her. "And you are?" She met his gaze without hesitation. "My name is Margaret Hale," she said, "and I'm here because I was told my daughter would be standing alone today." A ripple moved through the courtroom. Daniel turned fully now, irritation replacing his earlier amusement. The judge paused, then nodded. "Very well," he said. "Please take a seat, ma'am. We'll proceed shortly." Margaret didn't sit. "With respect, Your Honor," she said calmly, "I won't be staying in the gallery." Daniel laughed again, louder this time. "Oh, this is good," he said. "Another one without a lawyer." Margaret turned her head slowly toward him. And for the first time, Daniel felt something he didn't expect. Not fear, but the unsettling sensation of being measured. "I don't need a lawyer," Margaret said, evenly. "I'm not here to argue, I'm here to clarify." The judge leaned forward slightly. "Clarify what, exactly?" he asked. Margaret took one step closer to the front of the courtroom. "The truth," she said. The room fell silent. Daniel scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Your Honor, this is absurd," he said. "My wife couldn't even afford legal counsel, and now she's brought her mother for moral support. Let's not waste the court's time." The judge did not look at Daniel. His eyes remained on Margaret. "And you are not an attorney?" he asked. "No," Margaret replied, "but I spent 32 years working inside courtrooms just like this one." Daniel's smile faltered. The judge's brow lifted slightly. "In what capacity?" he asked. Margaret turned her gaze back to her daughter. "As a court-appointed forensic financial auditor," she said, "I specialized in uncovering concealed assets in domestic cases." The silence that followed was different. Heavier. Daniel's single quotes as lawyer stiffened. Daniel himself straightened in his seat. Margaret continued, her tone calm but precise. "I was asked not to come today," she said. "My daughter believed standing alone would prove her dignity." She reached out and gently placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "But dignity doesn't mean silence when someone is lying." The judge inhaled slowly. "Mrs. Hale," he said, "are you asking to address the court?" Margaret nodded. Double quotes, "Yes, Your Honor." Briefly, Daniel leaned forward. "Now, you can't be serious," he snapped. "She's not a party to this case." Margaret didn't look at him, but the judge did. "Mr. Reynolds," the judge said coolly, "you've spoken quite freely today. You'll allow others the same courtesy." Daniel opened his mouth to protest, then stopped. Margaret stepped fully into the well of the court. "My daughter," she began, "has been accused of financial manipulation, emotional instability, and intentional obstruction of visitation." Daniel's lawyer nodded confidently. Margaret turned one page of the papers in her hand. These accusations are detailed, she said, but they are not supported by reality. She looked directly at Daniel. They are supported by money, * Daniel's jaw tightened. Margaret faced the judge again. I am not here to argue custody, she said. I am here to correct the narrative this man has been allowed to create. She held up the papers. These are bank reconciliations, she said, offshore account summaries, trust structures, shell transfers. Daniel shot to his feet. This is outrageous, he barked. Your Honor, she's ambushing the court. The judge raised his hand. Sit down, he said sharply. Daniel froze. Margaret's voice did not rise. These documents, she continued, were not obtained illegally. They were produced during discovery in a separate matter 3 years ago. The judge leaned forward. And why were they not presented then? He asked. Margaret's lips pressed together. Because my daughter was told cooperation would bring peace, she said quietly. She believed dignity meant compromise. She glanced at her daughter again. She was wrong. The courtroom was utterly silent now. Daniel's confidence had evaporated. His lawyer whispered urgently to him, but Daniel didn't respond. The judge studied Margaret carefully. You understand, he said, that what you're suggesting has serious implications. Margaret nodded. Double quotes. Yes, Your Honor, I do. She turned one final page. And that's why I waited until today, she said, because today, he believed he had already won. Daniel felt it then, that shift. That subtle but unmistakable sensation, that the room was no longer tilted in his favor. The judge folded his hands. * Mrs. Hale, he said, the court will allow you to continue. Daniel's mouth opened. No sound came out. And for the first time since walking into that courtroom, the man who had mocked his wife for standing alone realized something terrifying. She was never alone at all. The judge did not look away from Margaret Hale as the weight of her last sentence settled over the room. His fingers remained interlaced, resting calmly on the bench, but his posture had changed. He was no longer indulging a request. He was assessing a situation. Proceed, he said again, slower this time. Margaret nodded once, as if she had been expecting nothing else. She stepped half a pace forward, placing herself squarely between the two tables, not aligning with her daughter, not confronting Daniel directly, but positioning herself exactly where the court itself could not ignore her. These records, she said, lifting the papers slightly, show a pattern that spans over 4 years. Small withdrawals, carefully timed deposits, funds moved just under reporting thresholds. Daniel's attorney rose quickly. Your Honor, objection. This is speculative and irrelevant too. The judge raised one finger. Sit, he said. The attorney froze, then slowly lowered himself back into his chair. Margaret did not react. She did not smile. She did not press the moment. She simply continued. * The narrative presented to this court, she said, is that my daughter deliberately restricted access to her child out of emotional instability and financial irresponsibility. She turned her head slightly, enough for Daniel to see her profile. But instability does not explain precision, she said, and irresponsibility does not leave audit trails this clean. Daniel shifted in his seat. For the first time, he didn't look amused. The judge leaned forward. Mrs. Hale, he said, be specific. Margaret nodded. 3 years ago, she said. Shortly before visitation arrangements collapsed, Mr. Reynolds liquidated a series of domestic assets. The proceeds did not appear in his declared accounts. Daniel's lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently. Daniel shook his head, still staring at Margaret. The funds, Margaret continued, were transferred into a layered trust structure managed through intermediaries. The purpose was simple. She posed to appear insolvent. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge's expression did not change, but his eyes sharpened. You are suggesting intentional misrepresentation, he said. I'm stating it. Margaret replied calmly. Daniel stood again, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is insane, he snapped. She's spinning conspiracy theories because she can't accept losing. Margaret turned fully toward him now. You didn't lose, she said evenly. You engineered. Daniel laughed, but the sound was brittle. You think because you shuffled papers for a living you can walk in here and rewrite reality. Margaret didn't raise her voice. No, she said. I think reality doesn't care how convincing you sound. The judge raised his hand. Mr. Reynolds, he said sharply, sit. This is your final warning. Daniel hesitated. For a fraction of a second, he looked like a man deciding whether authority applied to him. Then he sat. Margaret returned her attention to the bench. "My daughter agreed to reduced visitation," she said, "because she was told the court would otherwise believe she was vindictive, unstable, manipulative." She glanced back at her daughter. She chose silence to protect her child from conflict. The daughter's hands trembled slightly. Margaret continued, "But silence has consequences," she said, "especially when someone else fills it with lies." The judge nodded slowly. "And the child?" he asked. "Why was access restricted?" Margaret inhaled. "Because the child began repeating things no child should say," she replied. "Statements about money, about loyalty, about punishment." Daniel's attorney stood again. "Your Honor." The judge's voice cut through the room like a blade. "You will remain seated," he said, "or you will be removed." The attorney sat. Margaret's gaze hardened. "The child told her mother that if she visited her father, her mother would regret it," Margaret said, words used by adults, not children. Daniel slammed his palm on the table. "That's a lie." The judge stood. The sound of the chair moving back echoed like a warning shot. "Enough," he said. The room went dead silent. The judge looked directly at Daniel. "You will not speak again unless addressed," he said. "Am I clear?" Daniel's mouth opened. Then closed. "Yes," he said quietly. The judge sat back down. "Continue," he said to Margaret. Margaret nodded. "These records," she said, lifting a second set of documents, "were not intended to be used today. They were intended to protect." She looked at the judge steadily. "But protection becomes complicity when silence enables harm." The judge studied the documents. "How did you obtain these?" he asked. "Through lawful disclosure during my professional career," Margaret replied. "Retained copies permitted under retention statutes." Daniel's lawyer leaned toward him, panic creeping into his expression. "This court," Margaret said, "is not seeing a mother who blocked access." She let the word settle. It is seeing a mother who refused to let her child become leverage. The judge exhaled slowly. He looked at Daniel. Then at the attorney. Then back at the daughter, who stood pale but upright. "Mr. Reynolds," the judge said, "you filed motions alleging financial incapacity." "Yes," Daniel said stiffly. "And you claimed your wife was attempting extortion." "Yes." The judge tapped the papers once. "If these records verify concealment," he said, "your credibility collapses." Daniel swallowed. Margaret's voice cut in softly. "It already has," she said. The judge raised an eyebrow. "How so?" Margaret met his gaze. "Because a man confident in truth does not mock someone for lacking a lawyer," she said. "He welcomes scrutiny." The judge's lips pressed into a thin line. He turned to the clerk. "I want these documents reviewed immediately," he said. "Full forensic analysis." The clerk nodded. Daniel single quotes S lawyer stood. "Your Honor, we request a continuance." "Denied," the judge said flatly. Daniel looked around the courtroom for the first time. The room felt hostile. Not because anyone was shouting, but because no one was listening to him anymore. Margaret stepped back toward her daughter. She placed a hand over her daughter's trembling fingers. "You did nothing wrong," she whispered. The judge looked at both women. "This court will recess briefly," he said. "When we return, we will address custody, credibility, and conduct." He stood. As the gavel struck, Daniel felt something inside him crack. Not fear, not anger. Control. And as the courtroom slowly emptied, he realized the worst part. He had walked in believing he was the strongest voice in the room, and now he wasn't. Even the loudest silence, when the courtroom reconvened, the air felt heavier, as if the walls themselves had absorbed what was about to happen. Daniel Reynolds returned to his seat with none of the swagger he had carried earlier. His shoulders were stiff. His jaw locked so tightly it ached. His attorney whispered to him, but Daniel barely listened. His eyes kept drifting unwillingly toward Margaret Hale and then to his wife, who stood a little straighter now, as though something invisible had shifted inside her. The judge entered without ceremony. No small talk, no delay. "Be seated," he said. Everyone obeyed instantly. The judge glanced down at the file in front of him, then at the clerk, then finally at Daniel. "Mr. Reynolds," he said evenly, "the preliminary review of the documents submitted has already raised serious concerns." Daniel's attorney stood halfway. "Your Honor, with respect," the judge lifted his hand. I did not address you, he said. The attorney sat back down, pale. The judge continued, these records show discrepancies between declared income and actual asset movement, he said, not inconsistencies, discrepancies. Daniel swallowed. The judge turned a page. They also indicate a pattern of financial manipulation that coincides precisely with the period during which visitation disputes intensified. Daniel leaned forward. This is being twisted. He said hoarsely, she poisoned my daughter against me. The judge looked up slowly. You were instructed not to speak, he said. Daniel froze. Margaret didn't move. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The judge turned his attention to Daniel's wife. Mrs. Reynolds, he said, you've stood silently through much of this proceeding. She nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Is there anything you wish to say before the court proceeds further? The woman inhaled. For 3 years, she had been told silence was strength, that composure would protect her child, that dignity meant endurance. She looked at her husband. He didn't meet her eyes. Yes, she said quietly. There is. The judge nodded. Speak. Her voice trembled at first, but it didn't break. I didn't keep our daughter from him because I hated him, she said. I did it because I was afraid of what she was learning. Daniel scoffed softly. The judge's gaze snapped to him. That was not permission, he said. The wife continued. She came home asking why money mattered more than people, she said. Why lying was smarter than telling the truth. Why I should be scared. Her hands clenched. She told me that if I didn't behave, Daddy said he would make sure I had nothing. Daniel shot to his feet. That's a lie. The judge stood immediately. Sit down, he thundered. Daniel hesitated. For the briefest second, he looked like he might defy him. And then something happened. Margaret Howell spoke, not loudly, not forcefully. Daniel, she said calmly. He turned toward her without thinking. And that was his mistake. You've been loud all your life, she said. And you mistook volume for authority. The judge slammed the gavel. Enough, he said. Mr. Reynolds, one more outburst and you will be held in contempt. Daniel sat hard. The judge turned back to the wife. Continue, he said. She wiped her eyes. I wanted peace, she said. I wanted her to grow up without watching us destroy each other. Her voice hardened. But peace built on lies isn't peace, she said. It's fear. The courtroom was utterly silent. The judge leaned back. Mrs. Hale, he said, is there anything further you wish to submit? Margaret nodded once. Yes, she said. She stepped forward again. These transfers, she said, holding up one final document, were not just about hiding money. She looked directly at Daniel. They were about control. Daniel's face drained of color. This trust structure, Margaret continued, was designed so he could claim poverty while exerting financial pressure through intermediaries. She turned to the judge. He wanted her dependent. She said, confused, afraid. The judge closed the file slowly. He looked at Daniel for a long, unbroken moment. You mocked your wife today, he said quietly. For lacking representation, Daniel said nothing. You believed power meant preparation, the judge continued. That money meant immunity. Still nothing. The judge stood. This court does not reward intimidation, he said. It does not confuse manipulation with strength. Daniel's attorney rose. Your Honor, we request. No, the judge said flatly. He turned his attention fully to Daniel. Mr. Reynolds, he said. Based on the evidence presented, this court finds your testimony unreliable, your filings misleading, and your conduct contemptuous. Daniel's hands began to shake, effective immediately. The judge continued. Temporary sole custody is awarded to the mother. The wife gasped softly. Daniel's head snapped up. What? The judge raised his voice for the first time. Additionally, he said, this court orders a full forensic financial investigation into your assets. Daniel stood again, panic flooding his face. You can't. The gavel struck. You will sit, the judge said coldly. Daniel collapsed into his chair. The judge wasn't finished. Supervised visitation only, he said, pending completion of the investigation. Daniel stared ahead, hollow, and finally, the judge said, his voice steady, this court refers findings of financial concealment and coercive conduct to the appropriate authorities. The room erupted into whispers. Margaret exhaled slowly. Her daughter began to cry, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet release of someone who had been holding herself together for far too long. Daniel looked around the Courtroom. No one looked impressed anymore. No one looked afraid. The judge looked down at him one last time. You tried to be the boss in your own home, he said, in this courtroom. That arrogance cost you everything. The gavel struck. Court is adjourned. As people stood, Daniel remained seated. Frozen. For the first time in his life, there was no one left to intimidate. Margaret placed her arm around her daughter and guided her toward the exit. They didn't look back, and Daniel Reynolds finally understood what real power was.